Welcome to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King. This is Extra 106.3, and this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings, but they're absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. And today's table topic: political violence, fascism, white supremacy, and accountability. Yep, we're hitting it all. Like many of you, the death of Charlie Kirk has rocked us all, but it has also rocked our kitchen tables. We are now discussing some really hard topics that have caused some difficult conversations, family division, and hopefully a little bit of understanding. But most importantly, I want my audience, those of you who listen to the Janelle King Show, to know what you are talking about when engaging in these conversations. And today, I'm going to help you a bit. Most of you may already know about each of these topics. However, having a little bit of additional insight always helps with leading to understanding. So let's start with the obvious of the list of issues that we're going to discuss, and that's political violence. You know, I remember hearing a political commentator defend the 2020 riots, stating, "Rioting is the language of the unheard." Man, I strongly disagreed. But where I do agree is that we do have the right to protest, but we do not have the right to riot. And who isn't listening? Who's the unheard? The business owners of the businesses that are destroyed in your neighborhood? It's just an excuse for bad behavior and chaos. And unfortunately, this is a troubling issue that has been growing in our nation. It's a topic that hits home for many Americans, and while it's easy to focus on violence itself, it's even more important to understand what leads to these dangerous acts. You see, political violence isn't new. History is filled with examples of assassinations and bombings and riots. Think of the assassination of JFK, John F. Kennedy, or the violence that erupted during the Civil Rights era. These acts often stem from deep divisions, frustration, misinformation, propaganda, and a breakdown of civil discourse. But it's not just history. In recent years, it has been an alarming rise of violence at protests, threats to public officials, and even attacks on law enforcement. This is a very dangerous trend. So what is causing it? Well, there's many factors to contribute to it. A major one is the erosion of shared values and mutual respect. When political opponents are portrayed as enemies of the country, of the state, or of your house, rather than fellow Americans, tempers flare. When political commentators, predominantly from one side of the aisle, refer to their opposition as Hitler and tells Black people electing Trump is going to put you back in chains, as if we were ever in chains in the first place. You create a group of people who believe what is being said. Extremist rhetoric, misinformation, and fear-mongering fuels the fire instead of promoting unity. Some political leaders and groups have stoked division for their own gain. Another cause is frustration with government performance. When people feel neglected or see corruption and abuse, they begin to lash out. They question why it feels like this. The rules are all for me and none for thee. Economic hardships, social upheaval, and feelings of powerlessness also plays a significant role. It's a perfect storm. More anger, more division, less civility. But I want to emphasize that violence is not and never should be the answer. You remember when your mother used to say, use your words. And if any of you have siblings, you know that siblings can fight sometimes when you're growing up. And the moment you hit your sibling, it's like, no, use your words. However, when you look at America, Unfortunately, we've had to solve a lot of problems through war and through destruction. But true leadership requires compassion, patience, and a firm resolve. True leadership was put on display when Erica Kirk spoke just 48 hours after her husband was murdered. True leadership was also seen when the family of the assassin turned him in to authorities. I know that's being debated, but the fact of the matter is mom and dad didn't harbor him. We must condemn violence and instead focus on restoring civility, fostering dialogue, and rebuilding trust. So we have seen the signs, but now it feels like we are being pushed towards communism like Mao Zedong's China. They use tactics to control and manipulate its population. It's important to understand these methods, not to promote them or to try to engage in them, but to recognize the dangers of unchecked power and propaganda. And as conservatives, we're committed to individual freedom and limited government, and history shows us how dangerous it can be when leaders cross those lines. You see, Mao Zedong's regime was infamous for this brutality in controlling the people. One of the key tactics was mass propaganda, using propaganda to shape the narrative, glorifying the government's goals while demonizing opponents. The Communist Party spread messages that instilled fear, telling citizens the enemies are everywhere. Sounds familiar? And that loyalty to the state was the highest duty. Sounds like today, unfortunately. When I hear liberals say things like, every person who wears a red hat, the MAGA hat people, the Maha people, they're all enemies. Everybody's an enemy to the liberals. However, their allegiance is pledged to our government. It's very, very fascist. Using it in the correct term, but we'll talk about that. Another tactic was public confessions and purges. You see, Mao had campaigns called the Great Leap Forward or the Cultural Revolution, where individuals were forced to publicly admit to crimes they often hadn't committed. It's much like the cancel culture, right? Apologizing for things that are normal. J.K. Rowling, for 5 years, she was attacked relentlessly for simply saying that boys are boys and girls are girls. Many of those during Mao's reign that participated in these public admissions were humiliated. They were imprisoned, or in some cases, they were executed. An effort to break the individual spirit and to enforce total obedience to the government. Mao also relied on fear and intimidation, using re-education camps or secret police and surveillance to monitor every movement. No, we cannot make hate speech a speech of its own. Free speech is free speech. And if your speech is hateful towards me, you have the right to say that in America. You don't have a right to harm, but you can say whatever you want. Under Mao, people were afraid to speak freely, knowing that dissent would result in arrest or worse. It created a culture of silence, where trust was replaced with suspicion. But what's more important than understanding what happened is learning from it. We see the danger whenever the government values control over freedom, whenever it manipulates truth and uses fear to dominate. History reminds us, power unchecked leads to tyranny. I must say, every party has their loyalists, but they can't outnumber the voters who are willing to call out their own party. We have to remember, this is not about protecting the Republican Party or protecting the Democrat Party. It's about protecting our country. The fundamentals as to what makes this country free. Freedom is not getting your way because you feel like your side of the argument is the better side. Freedom is allowing everyone to have an argument. But in order to do that, we have to understand what we are seeing. So after the break, we're going to discuss some of the most used terms of today, particularly two that are just like, oh my God, it's exhausting hearing this over and over again. But it's fascism and white supremacy. What is it? Is it causing harm or is it helping? And what should we be doing in this moment as Americans? We're going to dive in. Don't leave the table. We'll be right back. You're listening to The Janelle King Show right here on Extra 106.3. Don't go away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Suzanne Guy, and this is the Church's Moment. There is an incredible opportunity to start a distinct pro-life ministry at your church. We started one at our church about 5 years ago, and the fruit has been tangibly beautiful. We do monthly meetings that educate and equip the body of believers on sanctity of human life issues from womb to tomb by bringing in and featuring different pro-life leaders from all over Georgia, as well as featuring different ministries like post-abortion healing ministries or foster care ministries. There are so many great community partners out there. And then the second part of this pro-life ministry is having a care team. This is an opportunity to show moms in crisis, moms in unplanned, unwanted, or crisis pregnancies that the church is the place to run to, that the church is a safe haven and a place to go for tangible help, real hope, true compassion, friendship, and discipleship. And yes, an opportunity to share the gospel in both word and deed. Brothers and sisters in Christ, will you consider starting a distinct pro-life ministry at your church? It's so easy. Please contact me today to find out how simple this is. You can contact me at my email, proverbs31:8@att.net. This is the Church's Moment.
Welcome back to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King. This is Extra 106.3, and this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings, but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. And today's table topic is for sure banned from family gatherings. It's political violence. We're talking about fascism. We're talking about white supremacy and accountability. Unless you've been living under a rock in America or you are in another country listening and you're just now getting caught up, the word fascism has been used more times than I thought I would hear in my lifetime. And can I believe that we're talking about subjects that we've only read about in our history books? But here we are. Because socialism and communism is certainly making a comeback and being owned by the Democrat Party. And personally, I believe we have a lot of young people who are being miseducated on what these terms really mean. And unfortunately, unless you have a baby boomer or someone who's older in the room, you probably have very little understanding as to what this is. So what is fascism? What does it mean to hear that word? How does it differ from communism and socialism? And who founded it? Where did it come from? Let's break it all down. Personally, I believe Dems are calling Republicans fascists because they cannot call us communists or socialists because there are too many young Democrats who are claiming those titles. And they clearly see the Republicans are winning the new culture war after having lost it for many years. And we're doing it by highlighting the dangers of communism and socialism. So in return, The Dems are trying to use that same strategy to pull their base back together, not knowing how far off base they really are. So first of all, what is fascism? Simply put, fascism is an authoritarian political ideology. It emphasizes strong central power, often led by a dictatorial or a dictator, with a focus on nationalism, suppression of dissent, and a disdain for individual rights in favor of a perceived good for the state. Okay, so let me stop here. For those of you who are listening who are like, well, that kind of does sound like Trump. Yeah, maybe it does because of how the media is presenting him. But we've got to stop here and discuss Trump. Because this new narrative, with emphasis on new, the left throws narratives at the wall every single day to see what they can run with. You have to ask yourself, is Trump exhibiting fascist leadership traits? Or are we really seeing actions that are being taken by states, by other leaders, and in some cases, private businesses? And if Trump happens to agree with those actions, then they treat him as if he's some form of a godfather who's out here giving orders that must be followed. Well, that's the first indication that you're not under a dictatorship. Because if we were, those who didn't do what Trump asked them to do will be more than just fired. They will be killed. Clearly, that's not happening. And I get it. The Democrat administrations feel like they are the ones that should be driving the ship. They should be telling us all what to do. I listened to a Democrat, matter of fact, he was a former DNC chair, say that there was no one running against Biden.
So now you can
the president.
You can tell the truth.
Well, I am telling the truth. Tell me with the power I have to pick. If I'm the DNC chair, what power do I have to pick? Like people say, well, you could have told Joe Biden to not run. Like, seriously?
Yeah.
Yo,
You could have said that.
I could have.
Nobody was against him during that time.
You could have and should have.
I could have. And do you think he would have listened? This is the most powerful. No, Charlamagne.
Talking about, to your point,
He did listen finally.
Somebody did listen to him. He did listen to somebody finally.
No, I think.
So everybody should have told him earlier.
I think ultimately what the president saw was that this fight is actually tearing the party apart, and I don't want that to be on me.
Stop it, Jamie.
No, I'm not. I'm telling you the truth.
You're not beholden to them no more.
No, it's not about being beholden to them. I'm telling you the truth.
That man was too old. Everybody knew he was too old.
But Charlamagne,
he should have been a transitional president from the beginning.
Charlamagne, I get all of that. I get all of that. But you know what? Somebody should have stepped up. If people thought that Joe Biden was too old, then some real people should have stepped up and said, you know what, I'm going to run.
But then they get their ass handed to him. When Dean Phillips does that, y'all kick him out.
Look, is Dean Phillips serious?
It don't matter.
They believe that they should decide who leads us. That we, the people, are a handful of folks in this Democrat roundtable that makes decisions for the whole country. In fact, given the recent political violence, the Dems seem to have the tactics of fascism in their arsenal. You know, I often hear Dems say, America first is a nationalism chant or a perspective of nationalism. Well, I can see where they could possibly be a little confused about what America first means. But you have to look at the actions of the administration. And the administration makes it very clear that it doesn't have to be interpreted. American first means just that. America first, then other countries who may need our help. It's truly the concept of putting the mask on first. Once again, the Dems are throwing narratives at the wall. However, we still need to know how to spot the behavior of fascism so that we can really be able to target it should we unfortunately see it rise. Fascists typically promote a militarized society. They reject Western democratic values like influencing and interfering in elections, and they use propaganda and violence to maintain control. So let's talk about the differences between fascism communism, and socialism. Because these terms are often confused, but they are quite distinct, fascism, as I mentioned, favors the authoritarian or the nationalist state, often a single leader at the top that tends to oppose ideas of equality instead of promoting hierarchy and order, much like Hitler. Communism, on the other hand, aims for a classless society where the means of production are owned collectively. It's the goal to eliminate economic inequality entirely. But in practice, communist regimes like the former Soviet Union have often led to authoritarian governments with little personal freedom. Socialism is a bit more flexible. It advocates for social ownership and regulation of the economy, but doesn't necessarily call for the abolishment of private property or a totalitarian state. Many Democrat countries have socialist policies or programs like public health care, Social Security, without adopting fascist or communist systems. The reason why you have to know all three of these is because typically what you see first is socialism that shows up, right? Where we're saying things like, oh, we should let the government do it. We should let the government pay for our health care, even though we're already have about 60 million people on Medicaid and we have 1.1 million doctors. So we're already a little bit stretched when it comes to that. However, there are some other states that have governmental or universal health care. That being said, it's almost like you see socialism introduced first, and then comes communism, because once socialism comes into play and everybody's on the government's dole, now communism has to come into play, because now we have to limit personal freedom because you can't do a whole lot of things because you can't stretch out the government. So you can't go to the doctor's office 4 times a year if everybody can't go to the doctor's office 4 times a year, and certainly can't do it if the government doesn't have the funds to pay for it. So now I have to put controls on you and your socialist programs. And then ultimately, it's inevitable that a fascist, an authoritarian will rise out of the midst of that, because now it's like, well, we got to have somebody who's dictating all of this. So it all goes hand in hand. So in short, when you hear fascism, think authoritarian or dictator. When you hear communism, think of the removal of social economic classes and the term equity. And when you think about socialism, think about your needs being met by the government and being under the government control. So now that you have the differences, let's continue to understand fascism a little bit more. So who founded fascism? Where did it come from? Well, the term was closely associated with Benito Mussolini, who established the fascist movement in Italy in the early 20th century. Mussolini regime came to power in the 1920s and became the prototype for fascist ideology. He was militaristic, he was an ultra-nationalist, and oppressive. Trump is not Mussolini. And most importantly, America is not Italy. The American people will revolt. We have done it in the past. That is how America exists and why America exists. Because the moment the government became too much, the people said no. So let's be clear on what fascist tactics really look like, because understanding these strategies can help us recognize the warning signs should they arise. But please be clear. These tactics are being initiated by the leader himself, not the party, not businesses, not those who support a particular party, simply the leader. And if you see these tactics coming from a political leader or someone who is campaigning to be a political leader, we must reject them immediately. So what are these tactics? First, propaganda. Using mass media to spread a single, often misleading narrative that promotes the leader and demonizes its opponents. When you hear the same message repeated over and over and over again, for example,
represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. Are they a threat to democracy? Yes. Are they going to take our rights away? Yes. Are they going to put people's lives in danger? Yes. Are they going to endanger the planet by not dealing with climate change? Yes. They're going to do all that.
Needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
And I don't understand why it's so difficult for the press to have a consistent narrative about how dangerous Trump is.
Trump is an existential threat to our democracy.
Do you think Donald Trump is a fascist?
Yes, I do.
This is what kicking the out of fascism looks like.
Comparing the tactics of Donald Trump to Mussolini and Hitler is a very legitimate thing.
We have a Timo Hitler in the White House right now.
The thing we were all warning about for the last few years is not coming, it is here. We do now live in a country that has an authoritarian leader in charge. We have a consolidating dictatorship in our country.
And what we're seeing play out here is Donald Trump's promise to be a dictator on day one.
Trump has seemingly never met a dictator he doesn't like.
It's some real dictator type stuff.
We live in a fascist dictatorship. That's what's happening right now. That's what it feels like. This is where we are.
Clearly, this is propaganda. The next is suppression of dissent. This is the silencing or imprisoning of political enemies, critics, or minority groups. The silencing or imprisoning of political enemies, critics, or minority groups. This is not imprisoning people or holding people accountable who actually did something wrong. It's when you conjure up stuff, forcing your political opponent to have to pay thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to defend themselves from nothing, to only be found not guilty, and to just secretly go away. That's a suppression of dissent. We saw Dems use this tactic on Trump when Jimmy Kimmel was fired. Again, we worry about this tactic when it's coming directly from a political leader. The Dems tried to say that Jimmy Kimmel's firing was Trump suppressing dissent when Trump had nothing to do with it, and all the behind-the-scenes conspiracy theories that were coming from all of this, trying to connect the dots to make Trump responsible. That is not fascism. If it really was an authoritarian dictator who was determining that Jimmy Kimmel should not be on TV, we would know it. We wouldn't have to connect dots. We wouldn't have to create these conspiracy theories. We will know. You will know. When Hitler labeled Jewish restaurants with signs and businesses with signs and imagery and sent people off to concentration camps, that is what it looks like when you suppress dissent. And to give you more of a current example, killing Charlie Kirk is a clear example of suppressing dissent, which was committed by someone who claimed to be an anti-fascist. Another strategy to be on the lookout for is the glorification of the leader and nation, fostering extreme nationalism and loyalty to a single charismatic figure. Now, this can be tricky, but it's there is a clear way to distinguish the difference, because it's okay to praise the actions of a leader. It's okay to support the leader. It's okay to really approve of who you're supporting, regardless of what side of the aisle they're on. But it's not okay when the praise is for the leader only and not the policies or the leadership of the person. When you're blindly following a leader and not being able to explain why. When you're telling people, this is who you should vote for. You don't have to do any research. Listen to me and vote for this person. And then you follow it. That's dangerous. It's fascist behavior, and we must be careful not to fall into that pattern regardless of who the leader is. Because remember, we're not protecting a party, we're protecting the country. However, Trump is loved or supported, whichever category you fall in, because of one or two reasons. One, he delivers on his promises and gets things done. And secondly, it's because the Dems are actually pulling the country in the wrong direction, and Trump seems like the better option. That's why people are supporting him. It's not because they just like, oh, I love his blonde hair. Let's go back to one strategy that was kind of briefly mentioned, but we need to dig into it a little bit more really quickly. And that's the fascist strategy of militarization and violence, using military force and paramilitary groups to intimidate and control the population. Emphasis on intimidate and controlling the population. So using the National Guard to reduce crime and support law enforcement, local law enforcement, is not militarizing our country. Intimidating people who are breaking the law and causing harm to citizens is not fascism. It's good leadership. Lastly, it's the rejection of democratic principles, undermining free elections, checks and balances, and individual rights. Clearly pushing for transparent elections is not a trait of fascism. Encouraging the state election boards to stand alone and for truth is opposite of fascism. When we see political leaders advocating for secretive election processes, meaning we are hiding the counting of votes and the tabulation of results, that is a problem. When you hear about leaders who wish to remove checks and balances from the Secretary of State's office, that is a problem. In America, we are a representative republic with a democratic voting process that includes an electoral college, which is why the popular vote doesn't always determine the winner. So now that we've addressed fascism, we got to quickly talk about white supremacy. Because in America, race has been weaponized to obtain control of voting bases and voting blocks, particularly the black voting base, for a very, very long time. And this topic has me so confused because I'm probably around more white people than most black people, particularly those who believe in white supremacy. Yet I only hear this term from black people. Now, granted, there could be white people that's talking about, I'm a white supremacist behind my back, of course. But I don't know. I mean, if it was so rampant, so attacking and so oppressive, then you would think that you would hear it from more people than black people. So is there a superiority complex problem or is there an inferiority complex problem? I lean towards the latter. I feel like there are a lot of black people who just feel inferior. So it's easy to think that there's some group of people that's controlling your every move invisibly now, because they're clearly not in your realm. They're clearly not around you. But, this is invisible arm that's somewhere controlling all of your outcomes, and the reason why nothing seems to work out, because clearly everything works out just fine for everybody else. But what is white supremacy? Because this is a term that is rarely used on the Republican side. I thought it would be best to provide a liberal definition. From a liberal perspective, white supremacy is understood as an entrenched and systemic form of racism that promotes the belief that white people are superior to people of other races. Liberals see it not only as individual hatred or bigotry, but as a persuasive ideology that has historically justified discrimination, inequality, and violence against non-white populations. They emphasize that white supremacy is embedded in many institutions, including the criminal justice system, education, housing, and employment, leading to ongoing racial disparities. Liberals argue that addressing white supremacy involves actively working to dismantle these systemic inequalities, promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, and ensuring justice for marginalized communities. So liberals believe that recognizing and confronting white supremacy is essential to building an equitable society where all individuals have equal rights and opportunities, and they advocate for policies and education aimed at undoing centuries of racial injustice. Okay, you heard that. Oof, that's a lot. That's their rallying cry or dog whistle, whichever, you want like to use. And they use it in a country that is the most diverse than any other country. A country who abandoned slavery centuries ago and never picked it back up. A country where, as a Black person, you can choose where you want to live, how you want to be educated, particularly on a college level, because the Democrats won't let public schools and K through 12 go. But you get to choose your own career. You're not off limits to anything. There's not careers that you just can't have. And so much more. White supremacy is still at the top of the discussion with all of these freedoms. You see, the uncomfortable truth is that the belief in white supremacy is what keeps you in a place of inferiority. As long as you have a concept to fall back on, as long as you have an external issue that you can't control to justify all of your failures, you will never find the opportunities that exist. Do I believe that there are white people who think that they're better than other races? Of course. But I also believe that there are Black people, Asians, Indians, Iranians, etc., who also feel the same way. Competition is the bedrock of a free market society. And yes, free market can also mean nepotism. It can also mean crony capitalism or the misuse of capitalism. But that is what freedom is, and demanding that there be classless and demanding that there are classes of people who have to be protected above others is supremacy. Asking corporations to change their hiring practices to ensure there is someone who is Black or brown because representation matters, that is supremacy. Thinking that all white people owe you something because of what happened to your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother is also supremacy. We have to be careful with these terms, how we use it and what we expect to come from the fight against it. Because thinking you can somehow legislate or protest hate out of the hearts of man is a fool's errand. There is one action that will address all of these topics. There's only one behavior trait that we must all embrace that will fix the political violence issue, the fascism, and the white supremacy, and that's accountability. And after the break, I will link it all together and share my heart on how we can use accountability to address these issues. We're almost done. Don't leave the table. You're listening to the Janelle King Show right here on Extra 106.3. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King at Extra 106.3. This is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. And today's table topic is political violence, fascism, white supremacy, and accountability. Yep, we're hitting it all in one show. So if you're joining me for the first time, that's all right. You can always go to the Janelle King Show on YouTube and get caught up right now, or you can wait and listen to the encore episode right here on Extra 106.3 that airs on Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. And then, of course, every Tuesday, the podcast drops at the podcast park here with 106.3 FM or wherever you get your podcasts. As a brief recap, before I close with my thoughts on one of the major behavior response, or the number one behavior response that we should all put into action, they can put a stop to all of this. We've already covered the complex issues of political violence, fascism, white supremacy, starting by addressing recent events and challenging conversations happening at the kitchen table across the nation, and the importance of understanding what true fascism really is, what it entails, the authoritarianism, the nationalist ideology and tactics like propaganda, the suppression of dissent, and what that really means, the glorification of leaders. What does all of that really mean? Not what we're stitching together to create. We debunk these false narratives that Trump or the Republican Party exhibits fascist traits, clarifying that the actions of promoting the America First and defending constitutional principles is not a sign of fascism. We differentiated fascism from communism and socialism to clear up misconceptions, explaining that fascism is characterized by a dictatorial control or suppression, whereas communism seeks a classless society and socialism focuses on government regulation. The discussion then shifted to white supremacy because that is the underlining force that I believe is the root of these ideologies in America, explaining the liberal description of systemic racism rooted in the belief of racial superiority and emphasizing that addressing it requires dismantling institutional inequalities, ending with how this belief in a superior race, whether you are the race or you think another race feels that way, only leads to personal neglect and harm. Which is how I wish to close the show. Because the one behavioral trait that separates winners from losers, those who succeed in life and those who complain to the grave, is accountability. You see, I remember working for a company and I made a mistake, and after the event, we were having this debriefing meeting. And during the meeting, my boss at the time asked me, asked the entire group who was responsible for the mistake. And I quickly raised my hand. I took full accountability. And I was like, it was me. It was me. And I think I said something like, and you know what? You told me this would happen. I'm so sorry. I didn't listen. I will learn and do better next time. I carried that moment with me through life. And I am a firm believer in taking accountability. You will never do everything right. We've all made mistakes. We will make mistakes. But when you're confronted, you have to take accountability. And if I ever find myself in a position where I'm clearly at fault, I will always own it. And you have to do the same. Accountability to ourselves as voters is key. When fighting to maintain a strong republic, free of fascist, communist, or socialist ideology, we must understand that the power exists with us. The voters picking the right candidate is a duty. It's not a right. It's a duty. And when we believe the election process isn't quite right, it is up to us to fight for what is right. Accountability for our own actions, whether you are white, black, or in between, must be at the core of our decisions. Before we go off blaming the white man, check yourself. And before you start believing the stigmas and the narratives associated with other races, check yourself by asking yourself, how many of my encounters with the other race does it end with confirmation bias? Do I expect black people to all be ghetto? Do I expect all black people to be violent? Do I expect all white people to be racist? Do I expect all white people to be harmful to the black community? Do I expect all Jews to be rich and own everything? What are these stigmas that we're holding on to, these biases that we're attaching to people versus taking accountability for ourselves and for our own encounters and our own personal experiences? Because accountability is the cornerstone of a strong foundation, and it will never steer you wrong. May we all start being more accountable to our God, to our families, to our country, to our neighbors, and to our purpose. Until next time, stay unafraid, stay unapologetic, and never stop seeking the truth.